because of the high risk of severe disease and mortality in that age group. So the evidence shows that the efficacy in older people, as was explained by Joachim, we see very strong immunogenicity, very comparable to younger adults. The efficacy estimate itself is a strong efficacy estimate, but with this uncertainty bound that does cross zero. But even if the efficacy were substantially lower than even what was measured, it's still the right thing to do to go ahead and vaccinate older adults using a product like this. And then I just wanted to address the emergency use listing question. I'm sure you understand that this is a product that is actually being manufactured in a number of different locations around the world. Those are referred to as nodes. The product that is being primarily managed by AstraZeneca, and then a product that is being managed by the Serum Institute of India. So those are two separate EUL processes, and both of them are in their last stages of evaluation, and decisions, meetings will be held on February 12th and 15th to consider each of these. And so we expect a decision to come out in mid-February on each of the AstraZeneca managed product and then the SII manufactured product.
Thank you. I would like now to invite Brazilian journalist Ana Pinto from Folha de Sao Paulo to ask the next question. Ana, can you hear me?
Sure. Hi, thank you. My question is about the P1 variant. I understand that there is no data on the impact of the AZ vaccine on the P1 variant, the one discovered in Brazil, right? But I would like to ask that, given the fact that this P1 variant has the same mutation of concern, the E484K, which is related to the ability of the virus to escape the antibodies. My question is if the same results should be expected, the same results encountered in South Africa should be expected, and if there should be more studies also about the AZ vaccine on the P1 variant to orient, to guide the policies in Brazil related to the protection of the people of the countries where there are this variant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Dr. O'Brien, you have the floor.
Yes, so just confirming that indeed you're right, either the serologic evidence or clinical evidence on the P1 variant are still in development. We know that first of all, the AZ product, as we all know, has a clinical trial ongoing in Brazil, and so cases are accruing, and we do expect that there will be evidence that will come forward around the interaction performance of the AstraZeneca vaccine in relation to the P1 variant, and that there would be serologic data as well, neutralizing titers to contribute to that evaluation. I think we are so in the early stages of understanding what any specific change in the virus means for the performance of one or another of the vaccines or the vaccines as a whole. So the speculations about what might be seen, especially speculating around P1 relative to what has been seen for B1351, where we've already appreciated that we have such limitations in the evidence around the B1351. So I think it's probably best to let the data speak for themselves rather than speculating on what the data might show, because we are so, as a world, in this learning phase with the vaccines and with the viruses. But we do need to be prepared for doing comparisons, undertaking surveillance so that we have a clear understanding of what the viruses the variants of the viruses are doing and how far and wide they are transmitting. And some of these variants may result in the virus being less fit. So it's not always that a variant actually is to the advantage of the virus. Some of the variants actually are either neutral for the virus or make a virus less able to cause infections in people. So we're in early days on P1 and its relationship to each of the vaccines that has demonstrated efficacy at this point.
Thank you. Let's move now to India. I would like to invite Ashwin Bashing from Observer Times to ask the next question. You have the floor.
Thank you for consideration. As it is report that the highest mortality rate of the COVID-19 disease occurred due to cytokine storms. My question is, what reports WHO have for over-response of immune system called cytokine storms in COVID-19 patients? Is this considered in AstraZeneca AZ-122 vaccine approval for emergency sanction around the globe?
Thank you. Dr. Swaminathan.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the primary endpoint in the AZ vaccine trial was symptomatic COVID-19 disease. So you had to have a positive PCR test with one or more of symptoms. There's a long list of symptoms. And then in most of the trials, they've tried to classify people in, if they got the disease, was it mild, moderate, or severe? The definitions vary a little bit between, the different vaccine trials, but WHO has a clinical definition scale. So when companies use that, then it's easy to compare. And then, of course, looking at hospitalizations and death, these are the endpoints, that were measured. There may have been more detailed immunological studies done, like the cytokine storm, for example, that you talk about. But I think the focus of the vaccine trials are really on looking at the immune response to the vaccine, both in terms of the cell-mediated immunity and in terms of the antibodies, what we call the humoral immunity. And one of the goals that we need to come, again, as a global community, we need to decide is what are the correlates of protection? What are the surrogate markers so that you don't have to do in the future by looking at rates of protection, but we need to define what immunological endpoints we are going to use for that. So that's something that's still being worked on by scientists. So the cytokine storm really is something that occurs when somebody gets severe COVID-19 disease, and there are many clinical trials going on to look at treatments for treating somebody who's got the disease, immunomodulators, anti-inflammatory drugs, and so on. But that's not the focus of the vaccine trial.
Thank you. Dr. Hombach, you have the floor.
Yeah, maybe just to add a small element. I mean, you're right that there is this concept of the cytokine storm in severe disease. And what I think is believed is that a certain type of immune response, a so-called more Th2 type of response, is certainly favoring this type of immune reaction. So that is something that the vaccine developers have looked into, because there is this concern eventually of enhanced disease, also that has been discussed, even though there is absolutely no indication that it actually occurs for SARS-CoV-2. And so there have been studies with this vaccine that have shown that the immune profile that is actually elicited by the vaccine is the so-called Th1 profile, which is not expected to be associated with this type of immune response and immune pathology. And this has also been shown in non-human primate studies, challenge studies, where no signs of immune pathology have been observed. So I think from that perspective, the issue has been addressed in the study of this vaccine.
Thank you. I would like now to invite Gunilla von Hall from Svenska Dagbladet, Swedish journalist, to ask the next question. Gunilla, you have the floor.
Thank you, Fadila. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I wonder, it concerns people over 65. What do you say then that the protective, the efficacy of the vaccine for people over 65 years is? What is your estimation? And then I'm a little bit puzzled because why are you coming with this? I know it's preliminary, but why are you doing this instead of waiting for the American study, which will come any day? And is much more in a broader group with more people over 65. And lastly, what is your message to, many European governments that are not recommending, have decided not to recommend AstraZeneca's vaccine to people over 65, among those France and Sweden? Thank you.
Thank you, Gunilla. Dr. O'Brien, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks so much. Again, we point to the evidence that comes from the efficacy trial and the estimates of the efficacy. Again, I'll repeat what the confidence intervals are on that, but the estimate of efficacy, depending on whether it's looked at after 1 dose or after 2 doses, is in the range of 52% to about 56%. And the confidence intervals on that go up to as high as 85%. And I mentioned, I think Dr. CRAVIOTO mentioned already, and so did Dr. HOMBACH, that the lower bound of the confidence interval goes below 0. So those are the efficacy trial results. They, first of all, doses were not administered in the extended interval strategy, which we also have evidence shows that with a longer interval between the 2 doses, you get better efficacy. And then the second point is that evidence is accruing from the UK as the vaccine has been rolled out. There are additional cases that are occurring, and we are expecting soon to have some effectiveness estimates among older people. The question was, why aren't we waiting? Why don't we just wait? Why don't we constrain the use of the vaccine to those under 65? And there are a couple reasons that I'll just emphasize again. The first is that even at these values, so we have strong confidence from the comparability of the immunogenicity data that there's no reason to expect that efficacy is substantially compromised in older people. The second is that we do have efficacy estimates that confirm that there is significant efficacy for those over 65. The third point is that the additional evidence we certainly are going to look at, but there is urgency to provide recommendations now at the present time when these vaccines are available at hand and ready to be rolled out in a large number of countries. And countries are relying on our best advice of how to use vaccines. Now, some countries may have a choice of products to use and may choose to use different products in different ways, either because of operational characteristics. Some vaccines that require ultra-cold chain, like the Pfizer vaccine, may be difficult to deploy in some settings. With multiple vaccines in a program, there may be the choice to preferentially use one or another for different uses. But there's no reason, especially because the over 65s are at the very highest risk of severe disease and death, that a product that has significant efficacy, it should go ahead and be used. That is the priority group, and so there's no reason to constrain the AZ product from a general recommendation in the view of SAGE and adopted by WHO for an age criteria, while we're also learning and accruing more evidence. The US trial, the multi-center trial, we're waiting with great anticipation. Our understanding is that those results are not expected for at least until into March. And so it's not possible, given the evidence that we have at hand now, the SAGE assessed that the preponderance of evidence weighed in favor of the age criteria for its use.
Thank you.
If I may add, Kate.
Please,
yes,
Alejandro,
please
yes, go ahead.
I think one of the considerations that SAGE is making is the need to stop severe disease and mainly people dying, and withholding a recommendation for a number of weeks, waiting for more information when we have enough to make a recommendation, I think would not be appropriate. We have thousands of people dying from the infection in many countries of the world daily. And I think anything we can do to use a product that might reduce that is totally justified, even if the information is not as complete as we would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. CRAVIOTO. I would like now to invite Jamie Keaton from Associated Press to ask the next question. Jamie, you have the floor. Jamie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I didn't know if I was unmuted. Yes, thank you very much. I guess this question is for Dr. O'Brien. Well, I want to just get a sense as to how concerned you are that South Africa, which of course is a reference for many developing countries, is expressing doubts about the AstraZeneca vaccine, which really is one of the most important parts of the COVAX project. How much is that factored into your thinking? And if you could just maybe elaborate a little bit, do you have any thoughts about whether or not more effort should have been done to diversify the portfolio with, say, Pfizer's, to make a stronger effort to get behind the mRNA vaccines earlier, whether or not there were cost and cold chain issues? Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jamie. Dr. O'Brien?
I think probably the first thing to say is we're in a very dynamic situation right now, and we will all be making adjustments to any recommendations as evidence continues to accrue. South Africa, every country is responsible ultimately for their own decision-making about their own particular circumstance and epidemiologic situation, and also under consideration of the stage of the pandemic, the priority populations, the product availability across the range of products that are out there. And so I think it's not appropriate really to take a kind of global view about the recommendations for countries to consider and then apply a specific country's decision-making. As we described, we're in really close conversations with South Africa. They are going to be using the AZ product and taking this pause to be able to assess exactly how to best design an evaluation so that more information can be added to this puzzle that is an incomplete puzzle at this point. There are a large number of doses of the AZ product and other products in the COVAX facility. It is a diversified portfolio, and it is increasingly becoming diversified. Part of the issue around the portfolio of vaccines for any country's bilateral arrangements or COVAX or any other regional portfolio, it's not just what's in the portfolio, it's also about when the doses come. And so we do have, for instance, the new J&J results, the new Novavax results, but those products are not yet authorized, and the timing of their availability from a supply perspective, they're not all evenly distributed over time for access for any country. So we really have to work with what we have at hand now in the portfolio, in the toolbox, available to countries, and make our best recommendation on the evidence that is available about how to best use those tools. And we have fantastic tools. This new evidence is important, but it's really inconclusive. And so the recommendation from SAGE is to continue with the deployment, especially because the vast majority of countries are facing a pandemic with strains of the virus that are not this variant, and even for countries that have this variant in the country, it's not the dominant variant. So there's still incredible value to be had, even if it would be true that the efficacy of the AZ product against the B.1.351 variant is has strong limitations to it. But we don't know that. We don't know whether or not what that efficacy is against severe disease for the B.1.351. So I think the diversification of the portfolio is an important question, and it has a diversified portfolio base. The mRNA vaccines, the decision-making around having the mRNA vaccines is also a portfolio management issue around the price point. Obviously, price determines how many doses can be procured. There are trade-offs there. The ultra-cold chain and the ability of countries to want that vaccine or to be able to handle that vaccine in a broad rollout. As you know, now we're deploying that vaccine imminently. Countries have been announced that will be getting that vaccine in the first wave. And those doses will likely be very constrained to use in capital cities where that ultra-cold chain can largely be managed. So there are these trade-offs, and that results in numbers of doses, type of product in the COVAX facility.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. I think I will take one or two more questions. I would like to invite Stephanie Nebehe from Reuters to ask the next question. Stephanie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, a question follows on from that, please, for Reuters. The South African health minister has said today that they're indicating they're trying to trade some of their AstraZeneca doses. And he specifically mentioned that there had been talks with the COVAX facility and with the African Union. Can you comment on that, please? Thank you.
So the COVAX facility obviously wants to work with countries to make it do everything possible to facilitate the rollout of vaccination. Countries can express preferences for some vaccines over others. They can opt out of vaccines. So I think it's perfectly possible for South Africa to have these discussions with the COVAX facility. South Africa already has vaccines which they directly purchased. So the first batch of AstraZeneca vaccine which is available did not go through COVAX. South Africa is also one of the countries that will receive Pfizer vaccine in the first wave from the COVAX facility. And then there are subsequently shipments of the AZ vaccine that have been planned. So I think it's possible to discuss this, and we should, as I said, we're open to this the discussion with countries. And as time goes on, there will be not only more volumes, but also broader portfolio of vaccines. We're very soon expecting to get the data from the J&J as well as from the Novavax vaccines, both for policy recommendations and for the emergency use listing. So as the months pass, there's going to be a wider variety of vaccines. But as Kate mentioned, there are trade-offs between these different vaccines. Obviously, the ultra-cold chain requirement for some of them, single dose being an advantage for a number of countries, as well as the efficacy in different age groups or other subpopulations. So I think as time goes on and we learn more, but I think the important thing is that right now it's important to get the vaccines out and the high-risk groups getting the vaccines so they're protected. As Dr. CRAVIOTO said, the pandemic is raging. We need to prevent deaths. We need to protect our health workforce, protect the health system so that they can then serve others. So that should be our priority now, using the vaccines that we have. And then as time goes on, the recommendations will get more refined. And I think the other important message is that we need to learn, and there needs to be a body of evidence that we consider, and we tend to react now to every finding, every study, regardless of, whether it was large enough, whether it was robust enough, whether the evidence was strong enough. This is not just for vaccines, but for treatments as well. We've seen this over the last year, right? We've become euphoric one day, and then we become depressed the next day. So this is where, we have to be a little patient. Let the evidence accumulate till we can make a decision based on the data, and that's exactly what SAGE will do. Thanks.
Maybe I can just add a couple of things. I do want to emphasize, both in relation to this question and the previous question from Jamie, is that there are actions by different sort of partners along the chain, and I think we really want to emphasize also the actions of manufacturers, that in order to achieve speed here and achieve access, what is absolutely critical, in addition to the things that we've talked about, the data and country decision making, is that manufacturers have responsibilities here as well, and they can help to make this global access easier. And the ways that they can do that, number one is prioritizing the submission of data to WHO for emergency use listing. We are unable to move on EUL unless we actually have the data to evaluate. We do expect that manufacturers will make that a priority as some of their, after the submission for the first authorization that allows the marketing of the product, we would really ask that manufacturers make WHO EUL their next stop, and that consultation be happening before they're even, while the data are in development, so that there is a readiness and a preparation to know what will be required and to be able to submit it. And the second is around prioritizing the COVAX facility for deal making. That this is the only global mechanism that we have for fairly and equitably distributing vaccines, so that we can assure that the highest priority groups in all countries are served, and doing that before serving lower priority populations in a limited number of countries. We've been really going at this message that there are now, we're at over 130 million doses that have been distributed and administered worldwide, and the vast majority of those doses are going to just 10 countries. So the importance of products being considered by the COVAX facility, getting into the portfolio, if there's an advantage for the portfolio in its diversification and its supply distribution, just cannot be overemphasized. And the willingness of manufacturers to engage in discussions and in negotiations. Discussions, of course, on the EUL side, submitting data for the policy process, which we're talking about here, and for undertaking assessment of deals with the COVAX facility. Those are things that manufacturers can do to make things go faster, make things go fairer, and make things more accessible. And so I think we're just calling on all actors to do the thing that's in your remit and your ability to assure that as a world, we're getting to the impact that these amazing scientific achievements hold promise for. But unless we have solidarity along with science, they're not going to get their maximum impact. Soumya, I think you wanted to add something. No? Okay. No. Thank you.
Thank you all. We have gone over 1 hour. In fact, it's 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I think it's time to close this press conference unless we have any final comment. I think I would like to thank journalists who are following us. And if you have any follow-up question, don't hesitate to contact the media team of WHO. Thank you all for your participation, particularly to Professor CRAVIOTO from Mexico. And just to let journalists know that we have posted the interim recommendation on the web, and they were also sent to the media list before the start of this press conference. You will be receiving the audio file just shortly after we end here. and see you Friday. Thank you all. Thank you all, and see you next Friday. Bye.